So today we're going to talk about a favorite word among the Christians, the word grace. Many Christians don't even know what grace means. They will say unmerited pardon, but I'm going to dig some deeper, a lot deeper than just merely unmerited pardon. So the archaic definition, which means in the old days, it meant mercy and pardon. Not just pardon, not just unmerited pardon, but mercy. Mercy is a word everybody understands the definition of. It is not even possible to confuse that word. Now, I want to show you something about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And for those of you who are wondering, what am I going to be talking about? Well, what's Franklin Roosevelt got to do with this? Just keep listening and it'll be explained to you. Franklin D. Roosevelt frequently invoked the concept of the U.S. as a Christian nation or Christian civilization, particularly in contrast it with the rise of fascism and totalitarianism. Well, those of you who may not know this, but the Nazi regime, Adolf Hitler's regime, was also called a Christian regime. And he famously described his political philosophy by saying, "I'm a Christian and a Democrat." So, key ways FDR framed the U.S. and Christianity include the twin pillars of civilization. In his 1940 and 41 speeches, FDR argued that democracy and Christianity were deeply intertwined, saying these forces hate democracy and Christianity as two phases of the same civilization. They oppose democracy because it is Christian. They oppose Christianity because it preaches democracy. The social gospel, shaped by his Episcopal upbringing at the Groton School, FDR's approach to governance using Christian moral language to justify the New Deal, interpreting the democratic citizenship as a civic duty of Christian charity. All right then. The same Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the same Christian nation. Now, from the National World War II Museum.org/war/article/war-refugee-board. Okay? Before I go into this article, right here, after the Kristallnacht attacks in November 1938, 94% of Americans opposed the Nazi treatment of the Jews, knowing then that it was happening. But 72% opposed allowing more Jewish refugees to enter the country. It was so bad. The anti-Jewish sentiment in the United States of America in 1938 was so bad that Jewish congressmen vowed not to introduce new legislation to increase immigration or to aid refugees, agreeing that any debate would only result in bills to actually lower immigration. Further bills that were much more likely, lower immigration further, bills that were much more likely to pass. So as a nation, the United States of America knew of the Nazi mistreatment of the Jews, but 72%, nearly three-quarters, opposed grace. Yes, I said it. They opposed grace. See, that's the problem with you Christians. You talk about grace, but you don't apply it. You don't believe in it. You just believe in grace for yourself. Matityahu, not Matthew, 5. And verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Where was the mercy? You will say, they opened up the concentration camps. Not as a nation. No, as a nation, the United States of America opposed allowing more Jewish refugees to enter the country. As individuals, soldiers who went in there and freed the Jews from the concentration camps, individually they showed grace. Individually they showed mercy. But as a nation, no, the United States of America did not show mercy. Now, what about the UK? What about Great Britain? Well, this National World War II Museum.org/war, etc. Did Allies know Holocaust? I don't want to lose my place here, so I will scroll up and go to the title. Cold-blooded extermination, the Allied government's December 1942 Declaration on the Holocaust. But look what it says down here. So did the governments in the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union know about the fate of Jewish communities in Europe at the end of 1942? Well, the previous article says that even in 1938, that they knew. Two single-spaced paragraphs encapsulated what these states had concluded. The December 17th document referenced numerous reports that demonstrated a transition from persecution to total annihilation. Yes, they knew. Identifying all these reports would necessitate a separate article. To be brief, a painful and protracted learning process for Allied leaders had played out. In August 1941, for instance, Winston Churchill, upon learning through the ULTRA intercepts of massacres perpetrated by the Einsatzgruppen on Soviet territory, he exclaimed, "We are in the presence of a crime without a name." And what crime was he referring to? The apt phrase signals the novel criminality in motion in parts of the USSR, or of the parts of the USSR overrun by German invaders. At the time, though, Churchill did not focus on Jewish victims, but emphasized the anti-Slav character of Nazi mass killings, enslavement, starvation, and murder of the Slavic peoples of the Soviet Union, civilians and combatants, was a fundamental aspect of Hitler's war of annihilation against the USSR. So you see, we have a pattern here of not only the leaders of Christian nations, but the Christian nations themselves are relegating the plight of the Jews to the very bottom of what was going on. To the bottom tier of mercy, meaning no mercy at all. I mean, you can read through all of this and it would go on and on. Now, not James chapter 2. His name, it never was James. Yaakov, or as you say in English, Jacob. Why did they change? Why did King James Version change the name from Yaakov to James? Because they hated Hebrew names so much they just could not bear to have the real name. So they changed it to suit their preferences, just like they change all scripture and doctrine to suit their preferences. And this right here is no exception. Just like the word Jesus is not Jesus, it is Yehoshua. As I keep telling you over and over again, and you people, you will refuse to listen. But see, remember folks, I don't do these videos so much as to try to cause you to see the error of your way. Of course, it's to cause you to see the error of your way. But I know that the vast majority of you watching these videos will not see the error of your way, and you will continue to do and tell the lies that you always tell. So I do this as a testimony against you. That's the reason why I like wearing this here. You know, the thing which you Christians forced the Jews to wear during the Shoah and the Crusades and other pogroms. So he said, Yaakov said, my brethren, have not the faith of our Adon Yehoshua HaMashiach, the Adon of glory, with the respect of persons. If there come unto you an assembly a man with a gold ring and fancy clothing, and there come in also a poor man in filthy clothing, and you have respect to him that wears the bright clothing, and you say unto him, you sit here in a good place, and say to the poor, stand you over here, or sit under my footstool. Are you not partial in yourselves, and are become judges, not of evil, but judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my beloved brethren, has not Jehovah, not God, chosen the poor of the world and rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he has promised to them that love him? But you have despised the poor. Do not rich men oppress you and draw you before the judgment seats? Don't they blaspheme that worthy name by which you are called? If you fulfill the royal Torah, according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you do well. But if you have respect of persons, you commit sin and are convicted by the Torah as transgressors. For whosoever shall keep the whole Torah and yet offend in one point is guilty of the whole Torah. And he said that do not commit adultery. He also said do not kill. Now, if you commit no adultery and yet you commit murder, then you are become a transgressor of the Torah. So speak you and also do. So you talk about what I'm saying to you, Christians, you talk about grace. Why haven't you done it? As they shall be judged by the Torah of liberty. For he shall judge without mercy those who showed no mercy. Because mercy rules or rejoices, exults over judgment. What happened on the day of the judgment upon the Jews? What did the Christians do? As nations, they showed no mercy. I have proven this to you today. Only individuals on the front line of the war showed mercy. Then there were thousands of individuals in Europe, like, for instance, Albert Goring, Irene Gut, and her married name Updike. She was one. There was a Japanese fellow who showed mercy on their own. They were not representatives of governments. Those are the ones who will be given credit. You know, the soldiers who opened up the gates of Auschwitz and started feeding the hungry. Those are the ones that are going to be given credit. I've just showed you that the United States of America and the UK, their governments wanted no part, and the people wanted no part of showing mercy to the Jews. Now, going back to here, where I was talking about, was 72% opposed allowing more Jewish refugees into the country. What context was this? This is the article concerning the War Refugee Board when concerning, and before this happened, right here, in the 1930s and 1940s, the United States had no refugee law or asylum policy. The passengers on the ill-fated St. Louis could not avail themselves of either. It is likely that the Jewish refugees constituted more than half of all immigration to the United States in 1939, and between 1933 and 1945, 180,000 and 220,000 refugees fleeing Nazism, Nazis permanently migrated to the United States. But still, the racist immigration quotas in place since 1924 were rarely filled during that time. They were blocking these people from coming everywhere they turned, is what I'm pointing out here. Although some slipped through the cracks. Now, it is common knowledge. Even AI knows this. By 1945, Nazi Germany and its allies had murdered nearly 2 out of 3 of every 3 European Jews. Okay? So 1/3 survived. It kind of brings you back to Zechariah 9, where it talks about, but wait a minute. That particular scripture talks about those who were living in the land in those days. Where? See, here's what I'm saying. When countries who turned their backs on the Jews while they were going through the Holocaust by the Nazi Christian regime are just as culpable as the Nazi regime itself. Oh, you don't believe me. You say, Henry, you are way out of line on that, Henry. Oh, no, I'm not. And that brings me to this article here. And I'm going to read as much of it as I can. The horrifying American roots of Nazi eugenics. You see, the United States of America and Great Britain were authors of the eugenics movement. Hitler and his henchmen victimized an entire continent and exterminated millions in his quest for a so-called master race. But the concept of a white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed master Nordic race didn't originate with Hitler. The idea was created in the United States and cultivated in California decades before Hitler came to power. California eugenicists played an important, although little-known role in the American eugenics movement campaign for ethnic cleansing. Eugenics was a racist pseudoscience determined to wipe away all human beings deemed unfit, preserving only those conformed to the Nordic stereotype. Elements of this philosophy were enshrined as national policy by forced sterilization, segregation laws, as well as marriage restrictions enacted in 27 states. In 1909, California became the third state to adopt such laws. Ultimately, eugenics practitioners coercively sterilized some 60,000 Americans, barring the marriage of thousands and forcing segregated thousands into colonies, and persecuted untold numbers in ways we are just learning. Before World War II, nearly half of coercive sterilizations were done in California, and even after the war, the state accounted for a third of all such surgeries. California was considered an epidemic of the American eugenics movement. During the 20th century, first decades, California's eugenicists included potent but little-known race scientists such as Army Venereal D specialist Dr. Paul Popenoe, citrus magnate and Polytechnic benefactor Paul Gosney, Sacramento banker Charles M. Gaethje, as well as members of the California State Board of Charities and Corrections and the University of California Board of Regents. Eugenics would have been so much bizarre talk, parlor talk, and had it not been for extensive financing by corporate philanthropy, specifically the Carnegie Institution, which is alive and well today, the Rockefeller Foundation, which was on the front line of the COVID vaccination drive, and Harriman Railroad fortune. They were all in league with some of America's most respected scientists, hailing from such prestigious universities as Stanford, Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. These academians espoused race theory and race science and then faked and twisted data to serve eugenics racist aims. You know, just like they did with this the COVID situation, which is an mRNA, which is another subject, but you're talking about the same kind of people. What is their aim? Well, we know what their aim is. It's been proven right here. Stanford president David Starr Jordan originated the notion of race and blood in his 1902 racial epistle, Blood of a Nation, in which the university's scholar declared that human qualities and conditions such as talent and poverty were passed through the blood. In 1904, the Carnegie Institution established a laboratory complex at Cold Spring Harbor on Long Island that stockpiled millions of index cards on ordinary Americans as researchers carefully plotted the removal of families, bloodlines, and whole peoples. From the Cold Spring Harbor, eugenics advocates agitated in the legislatures of America, as well as the nation's social services agencies and associations. The Harriman Railroad fortune paid local charities such as New York Bureau of Industries and Immigration to seek out Jewish, that's number one right there, Italian, and other immigrants in New York and other crowded cities and subject them to deportation, trumped-up confinement on or forced sterilization. The Rockefeller Foundation helped found the German eugenics program and even funded the program that Joseph Mengele worked in before he went to Auschwitz. And Rockefeller Foundation is alive and well in the United States of America today. Reason? Well, they have plans for the Rockefeller Foundation in the future. That's the reason. You know, it is written that a corrupt tree cannot produce good fruit. I will go there, I think, right here. A corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit. Neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. You see? Much of the spiritual guidance and political agitation for the American eugenics movement come from California's quasi-autonomous eugenics societies such as the Pasadena-based Human Betterment Foundation and the California branch of the American Eugenics Society, which coordinated much of the activities with the Eugenics Research Society in Long Island. These organizations, which function as a part of a closely knit network, publish race eugenics newsletters and pseudo-scientific journals such as Eugenics News and Eugenics and propagandized for the Nazis. Eugenics was born as a scientific curiosity in the Victorian age. In 1863, Sir Francis Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin, theorized that if talented people only married other talented people, the result would be measurably better offspring. Well, as my dad used to always say, what one generation builds up, the next generation tears down. And you all know this is true. At the turn of the last century, Galton's ideas were imported into the United States, such as Gregor Mendel's principles of hereditary were rediscovered. American eugenic advocates believe with religious fervor that the same Mendelian concepts determining the color and size of peas and corn and cattle are also govern the social and intellectual character of men. In an America demographically reeling from immigration upheaval and torn by post-Reconstruction chaos, race conflict was everywhere in the early 20th century. Elitist utopians and so-called progressives, and they still call themselves progressives today. So anytime you see somebody who calls himself a progressive, this is who they are. Use their smoldering race fears and class bias with their desire to make a better world. They reinvented Galton's eugenics into a repressive and racist ideology. The intent? Populate the earth with vastly more of their own socio-economic and biological kind and less or none of everyone else. The superior species the eugenics movement sought was populated not merely by tall, strong, talented people. Eugenicists crave blonde, blue-eyed Nordic types. This group alone, they believe, was fit to inherit the earth. In the process, the movement intended to subtract emancipated Negroes, immigrant Asian laborers, Indians, Hispanics, East Europeans, Jews, dark-haired hill folk, poor people, the infirm, and really anyone classified outside the gentrified genetic lines drawn up by the American raceologists. How? By identifying so-called defective family trees and subjecting them to lifelong segregation and sterilization programs to kill their bloodlines. The grand plan was to literally wipe away the reproductive capability of those deemed inferior and weak, the so-called unfit. the eugenicists hoped to neutralize the viability of 10% of the population at one sweep until none were left except themselves. 18 solutions were explored. This is the United States of America, folks, and Great Britain. Were explored in Carnegie-supported 1911, the preliminary report of the Committee of the Eugenics Section of the American Breeders Association to study and to report on the best medical means or best practical means for cutting off the defective germplasm in the human population. Point 8 was, guess what? Euthanasia. The most commonly suggested method of eugenicide in America was a lethal chamber. You know, like a gas chamber. Or locally operated gas chambers. In 1918, Popenoe, the Army venereal disease specialist during World War I, co-wrote the widely used textbook Applied Eugenics, which argued from a historical point of view, the first method which presents itself is, guess what? A bullet to the back of the head. That's right, execution. Its value in keeping up with the standards of the race should not be underestimated. Applied Eugenics also devoted a chapter to lethal selection, which operated through the destruction of the individual by some adverse feature of the environment such as excessive cold, bacteria, or by bodily deficiency, or as we now know today as a supervirus introduced into the population by scientists at a research lab in China. But the research lab was supported by the United States of America. You see, folks, things don't really change a whole lot, does it? Eugenics breeders believed American society was not ready to implement an organized lethal solution, but many mental institutions and doctors practiced improvised medical lethality and passive euthanasia on their own. And this is the reason why, folks, they got rid of these mental institutions. Those of you who say we need to bring them back, because there was too much executions going on in those places. One institution in Lincoln, Illinois, fed its incoming patients milk from tubercular cows, believing a eugenically strong individual would be immune. 30 to 40% annual death rates resulted at Lincoln. Yes, this is your Christian nation, the United States of America. Some doctors practice passive eugenicide, one newborn infant at a time. Other doctors at mental institutions engaged in lethal neglect. Nonetheless, with eugenicide marginalized, the main solution for eugenicists was the rapid expansion of forced segregation and sterilization, as well as more marriage restrictions. California led the nation, performing nearly all sterilization procedures with little or no due process. In its first 25 years of eugenic legislation, California sterilized 9,782 individuals, mostly women. Many were classified as bad girls, diagnosed as passionate, oversexed, or sexually wayward. At Sonoma, some women were sterilized because of what was deemed an abnormally large clitoris or labia. In 1933 alone, at least 1,278 coercive sterilizations were performed, 700 of which were on women. The state's two leading sterilization mills in 1933 were Sonoma State Home with 388 operations and Patton State Hospital with 363 operations. Other sterilization centers including Agnews, Mendocino, Napa, Norwalk, Stockton, Pacific Colony State Hospitals. Even the United States Supreme Court endorsed aspects of eugenics. In its infamous 1927 decision, Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, "It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime or let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. This decision opened the floodgate for thousands to be coercively sterilized or otherwise persecuted as subhuman. Years later, the Nazis at the Nuremberg trials quoted Holmes's words with their own defense, just like they quoted Martin Luther, the father of Protestant Christianity. Only after eugenics became entrenched in the United States was the campaign transplanted into Germany, with no small measure through the efforts of California eugenicists who published booklets idealizing sterilization and circulating them to German officials and scientists. So you see, folks, the root of the Holocaust began in the United States and Great Britain, but not just then, not just United States and Britain, but the entire Christian religion, as I have pointed out in the videos, talking about the Catholic Church, talking about the Protestant Church, and their efforts to snuff out the lives of all the Jews. Hitler studied American eugenics laws. He tried to legitimize his anti-Semitism by medicalizing it and wrapping it in a more palatable pseudo-scientific facade of eugenics. And folks, this is not the only definition of sorcery, but this is a classic definition of sorcery. Hitler was able to recruit more followers among reasonable Germans by claiming that science was on his side. Oh, things that people will do in the name of science. They say, trust the science. I say, do not trust their science. While Hitler's race hatred sprung up from his own mind, the intellectual outlines of the eugenics Hitler adopted in 1924 were made in the good old US of A, that wonderful Christian nation. During the 1920s, Carnegie Institution eugenics scientists cultivated deep personal and professional relationship with Germany's fascist eugenicists. In Mein Kampf, published in 1924, Hitler quoted American eugenic ideology and openly displayed a thorough knowledge of American eugenics. There is today one state, wrote Hitler, in which at least weak beginnings toward a better conception of immigration are noticeable. Of course, it is not our model, the German Republic, but the United States. Hitler proudly told his comrades just how closely he followed the program of the American eugenics movement. I have studied with great interest, he told a fellow Nazi, the laws of several American states concerning prevention of reproduction by people whose progeny would in all probability be of no value or be injurious to the racial stock. Hitler even wrote a fan letter to American eugenic leader Madison Grant, calling his race-based eugenics books The Passing of the Great Race his Bible. Hitler's struggle for a superior race would be a mad crusade for a master race. Now the American term Nordic was freely exchanged with Germanic or Aryan. Race science, racial purity, and racial dominance became the driving force behind Hitler's Nazism. Nazi eugenics would ultimately dictate who would be persecuted in a Reich-dominated Europe, how people will live, how they would die. Nazi doctors became the unseen generals in Hitler's war against the Jews and other Europeans deemed inferior. Doctors would create the science, devise the eugenics formula, and even hand-select the victims for sterilization, euthanasia, and mass extermination. During the Reich's early years, eugenicists across America welcomed Hitler's plans as the logical fulfillment of their own decades of research and effort. California eugenicists republished science propaganda for American consumption. They also arranged for Nazi scientific exhibits such as August 1934 display of the LA County Museum for the annual meetings of the American Public Health Association. In 1934, as Germany's sterilizations were accelerated beyond 5,000 a month, the California eugenic leader C.M. Gaethje, upon returning from Germany, ebulliently bragged to a key colleague, "You will be interested to know that your work has played a powerful part in shaping the opinion of the group of intellectuals who are behind Hitler in this epoch-making program. Everywhere I sense that their opinions have been tremendously stimulated by American thought. I want you, my dear friend, to carry this through with you for the rest of your life, that you have really jolted into action a great government of 60 million people." That same year, 10 years after Virginia passed its Sterilization Act, Joseph de Jarnett, superintendent of Virginia's Western State Hospital, observed in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, "The Germans are beating us at our own game." More than just providing the scientific roadmap, America funded Germany's eugenics institutions. By 1926, Rockefeller had donated some $410,000, almost $4 billion in 21st century money, to hundreds of German researchers. In May 1926, Rockefeller awarded $250,000 to the German Psychiatric Institute of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, later to become the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Psychiatry. Among the leading psychiatrists at the German Psychiatrist Institute was Ernst Rudin, who became director and eventually an architect of Hitler's systematic medical repression. Another in Kaiser Wilhelm's Institute eugenics complex of institutions was the Institute for Brain Research. Since 1915, it had operated out of a single room. Everything changed when Rockefeller money arrived in 1929. A grant of $317,000 allowed the Institute to construct a major building and take center stage in German race biology. The Institute received additional grants from the Rockefeller Foundation during the next several years. Leading the Institute once again was Hitler's medical henchman, Ernst Rudin. Rudin's organization became a prime director and recipient of the murderous experimentation and research conducted on Jews, Gypsies, and others. Beginning in 1940, thousands of Germans taken from old age homes, mental institutions, and other custodial facilities were systematically gassed. Between 50,000 and 100,000 were eventually killed. Leon Whitney, executive secretary of the American Eugenics Society, declared of Nazism, "While we were pussyfooting around, the Germans were calling a spade a spade." A special recipient of Rockefeller funding was the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity, and Eugenics in Berlin. For decades, American eugenicists had craved twins to advance their research into heredity. The Institute was now prepared to undertake such research at an unprecedented level. On May 13, 1932, the Rockefeller Foundation in New York dispatched a radiogram to its Paris office. June meeting executive committee, $9,000 over a 3-year period to KWG Institute Anthropology for research on twins and effects on later generations of substances toxic for germ plasm. At the time of Rockefeller's endowment, Otmar Freiherr von Verschuer, a hero in American eugenics circles, functioned as the head of the Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity, and Eugenics. Rockefeller funding of that institute continued both directly and through other research conduits during Verschuer's early tenure. In 1935, Verschuer left the institute to form a rival eugenics facility in Frankfurt that was much heralded in the American eugenics press. Research on twins in the Third Reich exploded, backed up by government decrees. Verschuer wrote in Der Erbarts a eugenics doctor's journal he edited that Germany's war would yield a total solution to the Jewish problem. Now, there's more to read here, but I think you get the gist of it. Verschuer had a long-time assistant. His name was Joseph Mengele. Are you proud of your Christian nation, you English-speaking peoples? Right here, the Rockefeller Foundation, the same one who attempted to exterminate the Jews, committed over $1 billion to COVID-19 response efforts focusing on vaccine equity distribution and countering misinformation. Remember, folks, remember what I just showed you. Every good tree brings forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. This tree, the United States of America, and the tree, the UK, as well as all the other European nations, are trees that have brought forth bad fruit because they are corrupt trees. And what happens to these corrupt trees? Every tree that brings not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. So, we're talking about grace. Or even Christians know that the grace period ends. But they don't know who it ends for. The grace period, current grace period, ends for the Gentiles. And it will begin for the Jews. Even though Christians, they claim that grace as a free and unmerited gift, why they say God is because they hate Jehovah, as written in the Judgement, primarily understood as salvation through faith in, as they say, Jesus Christ. When Christians say this, grace isn't for Jews, it is because of the theological distinction that Jews do not accept, as they say, Jesus as the Messiah. Unfortunately, the Christians do not accept Yehoshua as the Mashiach. They hate that name. That's why they use the name Jesus. So, when Christians say that grace isn't for Jews because they do not accept Jesus as the Messiah, the Christians are condemning their own selves. I just showed you the name is Yehoshua. The Christians condemn themselves because they refuse to accept the name, the real name, Yehoshua, thereby removing grace from themselves. Now, in the scripture, as I have pointed out to you many, many times, you can look in Ezekiel 39, and it says that when Jehovah saves Israel, that Israel will believe from that day and forward. Okay, it says that. I'll show you. Watch this. It's so easy to do. From that day, right there it is. See that? From that day and forward, the house of Israel will, well, I'll show it to you. So the house of Israel shall know Jehovah, not the Lord, Elohim, not God, from that day and forward. You say that the Jews don't get grace. And I will set my glory among the Gentiles, and all the Gentiles shall see my judgment that I have executed in my hand that I have laid upon them, so that the house of Israel shall know Jehovah Elohim from that day and forward, and not before. They're going to know and they're going to believe when he does this Ezekiel 38-39 war. He will bring them all back into the land, and then he's going to execute his judgment upon the Gentiles. That's how they're going to believe. And you have no say in the matter. Paul, in Romans 11, he says this. Verse 25, for I would not, brethren, that you should be, who's he talking to? He's talking to Romans. That you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you, Romans, should be wise in your own conceits, that partial blindness has happened to Israel until it says the filling up of the Gentiles be come in. But that's not what it says. You go to Luke 21 and you find out exactly what it says. Luke 21, Strong's Concordance. And Jerusalem shall be trodden of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Now, Romans 11. I know some of you are going to be very, very angry about this, but it's too bad. Too bad for you. That partial blindness has happened to Israel until it says the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. What happens when the time of the Gentiles comes to the end? All Israel shall be saved. Because it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, who will turn away unrighteousness from Jacob. That means Jacob is unable to turn away unrighteousness from itself. You Christians will say, since they are unable and unwilling to do so, then they get no grace. This says the opposite of what you say. You Christians are liars, because it says, and so all Israel shall be saved, because it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer who will turn away unrighteousness from Jacob. If that's not grace, then I don't know what grace is. But that's grace. In fact, you Christians don't know what grace is, and you do not care about grace, and you actually hate grace. For this is my covenant unto them. Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34. Hebrews 8, verses 8 through 12. When I shall take away their sins. So, grace is coming for Israel because you Christians rejected grace for the Jews. But grace is also coming for Israel for the sakes of right here, but concerning the glad tidings to Zion, Israel might be Roman's enemies, but concerning the election, Israel are the beloved elect, for the patriarchs' sakes, for Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov's sakes, because the gifts and the calling of Yehovah, not Got, cannot be repented of, cannot be changed. And there is the conclusion of what grace really is and how you Christians have rejected grace. So, when the time of the grace period ends, judgment shall begin for the Gentiles, and grace shall begin for all Israel.